Right, should be live now.
Okay. What's the usual lag? It's usually like 30 seconds.
It's normal. Yeah, I've set it to 30 seconds, so
okay,
don't
cool.
worry.
Yeah, I can see it. Okay, so welcome everybody who's in the stream. Welcome to the Splunk User Group in Edinburgh. Well, virtual, but Edinburgh User Group. We're going to talk today about legacy forwarder migrations and Splunk Connect for Syslog as well. Let's get on. This is the agenda. At the end, we will leave it open for any other business. If anyone has any questions, obviously you can ask them after the presentation if you want. Either do it in the chat. If you're joining us via the Teams link, which hopefully you got in a message, if you want to come in that way, that's fine too. But then we'll have any other business at the end as well, just in case there is anything people would like to discuss. So I'll leave it to Andrew to introduce himself.
Yeah, so I'm Andrew. If you've been to any of the sessions, you probably know where I am already. I don't really know what else to say. I'm not presenting today, but I'll be in the chat, sort of keeping my eye out for questions and things like that.
And I'm Tom Wise. I'm one of the engineering leads at Edinburgh Security. Been using Splunk now for probably about 8 years, mainly focused on SOAR recently, but kind of still dabble in quite a lot of things Splunk. So today we've got a different speaker for once, which is Lax Ganasan, and then obviously I will be talking as well. So apologies for that, but yeah, we needed some content. So obviously the sponsor of this user group is Adama, with the company me and Lax both work for. We're one of the largest delivery partners for the UK. We provide security consultancy and managed service SOCs. And as you can see, we've also won a few awards over the years. Also, both Lax and I are in the Splunk Trust as well. So you're definitely in good hands today when it comes to Splunk. Obviously, this will be recorded. It is virtual as well, but it will be recorded and made available publicly after here. So if you do want to discuss anything, please don't mention anything you don't want to be shared publicly, especially confidential information. If you are talking about an example or bringing examples to the table, then please don't identify your clients, of course, unless you're happy for it to be made public. Just some very basic house rules before we get started with our first talk. This is a user group experience. It is kind of driven primarily by the technology. We're not trying to sell anything here. We are just trying to, I guess, provide knowledge transfer effectively from, some people who've been on the front lines of some of these things. It's all going to be technical discussions. It's inclusive. No knowledge is, assumed. So most of the talk should be kind of relatively understandable. And like I say, the technology is primarily what we actually lead with or led by. Okay, so without any further ado, I will hand over to Lax to start the talk on legacy forwarder migration. I put fun on the end because I know you had fun doing it, Lax.
Thanks. Yeah, a lot of fun, not just fun, a lot of fun. Thanks for everyone who's watching. My name is Lax. I'm a Lax Ganasan. I'm a Splunk engineering, a security engineering engineer in the organization. And I've been with Splunk for over 12 years now with various capacity, working on different engagements. Of late, this is something that I've recently worked on, which I wanted to share some experience with all of you. So hopefully, if you're coming down the path, then you have something to look up and try to take some inputs from here on. So some of the customers that I've looked at, they got the Germany forwarder. Germany is again a third-party vendor who had deployed some to customers to manage everything via user interface. And this is something like you can get an image loaded into VM, and then you can continue to configure, upgrade your systems. You can push configs to the deployment server and config to the heavy forwarder, EMF or UF, or any components in the Splunk topology. You can do that. It also comes with the syslog collector, which is the open plug. The only thing that comes with it, there is an ongoing cost per VM. And if you're a customer with multiple VMs, then you're going to pay so many times the cost for the support and upgrade and ongoing maintenance. The customers of late with the pressure on them and the capital budget, they want to look at ways to reduce their spend. And one of the options that we are seeing customers looking at is moving away from third-party solutions in favor of native Splunk capabilities. So moving on. Yeah. It could move on to the next slide. Perfect. Yeah. So challenges, right? This is again, I've just categorized them into 3 different categories, but again, there are numerous challenges based on what you see in the deployment. For example, looking at the timescales, right? Customer, when they're under pressure, or whether it's be time pressure, resource pressure, they just want everything to be done in days. I mean, and some of them, they do not even know what is deployed and what is that they're getting it, but they just want to migrate and get it done. Sometimes you also hear customers to make any changes. We just want to migrate as is, and we have no firewalls, no time for building new setup and doing all the things. Again, if you look at the deployment server, over the period of time in the last few years where this service was in use, people have managed a lot of configuration via UI, but then they've not removed any config that was not needed. So it has become like a ground for a lot of configs that are sitting idle but not used. And sometimes you also see cases like deployment clients have never talked in for weeks or months. We don't know whether it's broken or they have decommissioned, or for example, stopped running. So, and sometimes we also come with a classic example where we are finding customers not using DNS aliases for the deployment server, and everything is an IP, which becomes a bit of a challenge when we are trying to migrate when you have a deployment client state. And the other thing, which is probably some of you already know, is the network topology or design document. None of them are available. People say we don't have any of the documents. We inherited this deployment. We're just maintaining as is. As I've seen some diagrams, but again, that's not up to update configuration live. So that becomes a challenge for us to. And what is the ASIS architecture, and how do we start looking at migrating them to the 2B architecture? The other thing also is some customers do open connectivity internet. So we got on what can we do without internet connectivity? What do we need to do for a bare minimum, patching? For example, if you're a customer who has a standard server, want to have an internet connectivity but want to get everything from the patching server, that is fair enough, but you still need some connectivity to internet to do things which we can restrict based on what we need. So we got to work with them, understand what we need, and then take it from there. I'll also say not even access to them, unfortunately. With some of the inherited machine, that's another challenge that is available to people who come from for migrating. So which means it needs a proper focus and understanding, and then a number of testing to make sure you understand the system, capture what is available before you start actually dwelling patients. Yeah, next slide, Tom, please. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So then the obvious question is, how do we overcome this challenge? How do we make sure we can successfully migrate these customers to give them the benefit of using the standard Splunk forwarder setup without incurring an additional cost? Yes. The approach that we have followed is discover. We got to discover what is available, spend time in understanding the different configurations, understand what is talking and what is not talking in terms of client, like understand what can be left out, what can be cleansed, what can be taken out. So you use an approach like a discover everything, document, validate, even verify if you can verify against your current log that are coming onto the Splunk cloud or Splunk on-prem, whichever is your configuration. And then also run it past with the customer, run a workshop or calls to understand, replay what you have discovered. Ask them, is that making sense? And tell them that I'm not seeing or the decommed. Yes, some cases I've seen that people have decommed. They never told the system engineer who is managing them. So then in that case, you probably want to remove them from the config. Then once you understand and validated your approach, validated what you want to do, then there is a task of this. Use this as an opportunity to review all the apps and add-ons there. Can you update them to the latest supported version so that you don't have to do them at later stage. So document everything, then create server class using what you want, what is there now, and what you want to have in as a final stage after your validation. And this server class should be now very clean and should know and should deploy the required apps only to the deployment clients. Again, test them thoroughly with the kind of testing with the heavy forwarder, testing to the Splunk cloud, taking out all unwanted configurations and putting the new apps and add-ons. That the benefit of any new changes, new config, new boxes, everything you can take into account. Then test, and test. The important thing is making sure test and test and test. And if you need to implement additional firewall rules, extended firewall rules, sometimes in AWS, we have seen people using standard firewall groups, which is very easy for them to. In some cases, we just have to go with what is available and then fix it if they're broken firewall. Test as much as possible, and then work with customer based on the constraint they have. We've seen both customers have to work with them on the approach of the first one, that IP hosting swap. So in which case we set up everything, go through the challenge, set up, validate as much as you can, have a fallback plan in place in case, for example, you don't have a syslog ng, you don't have an RSys or other syslog solution in place, so that if something goes wrong, you do not have to redo the whole thing. You just have a solution and the tested solution which you can fall back to. The other approach which I like really is a phased migration, where you set up everything again, set up the new Splunk deployment server, heavy forwarder or intermediate forwarders, and then migrate them in phases. Again, this might look like it is taking a bit long. So you have a plan to go forward as well as to go back if there's a problem, debug and move forward. Services which are critical for your business. So then you move one at a time, one time, or one site at a time. Your validation is done. The same. In Germany. So our goal is to make components that we have in Germany where there is deployments. Everything is migrated, and we just want to make sure as part of the migration, we are removing the unused, unwanted apps, updating the apps and add-ons. Deployment server is configurations of all the that are connecting using the Splunk recommended or best practice business names. All the things you want to accommodate as much as possible in the time frame and then migrate and validate and continue forward. Once you're migrated, the existing services that you're coming from, and release the save servers back to the customer, and then save their fees or like costs or year-end support costs, and go back to the native Splunk world. That's pretty much what I wanted to talk about based on the recent experience. But happy to take any questions or follow up if needed. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Lax. I mean, just for context as well, I was kind of a bit involved in the project as well, and yeah, there was real constraints. The customer just didn't have the network team or the capability to move quickly if we needed to, and also didn't have the capacity to build like a test environment. So they just wanted us to literally just build the boxes, like, and flip the IPs. But obviously the testing bit was like quite hard to do, right? Because they just they didn't want to add any new firewall rules. Therefore, they just assumed, I mean, rightly, potentially, that they just put the new box in, flip the IP address, and everything will just work. And I mean, it did in the end, but there was, we went through a lot of pain, didn't we, Lax? More you and other people. I got to sit in the bleachers. But no, thanks for that, Lax. If there is any questions from anyone, I'll leave it a minute in the chat, and obviously we can loop back to them as well. But otherwise, we'll just move on to the next talk.
Yeah. Oh, keep my eye out for questions. There's nothing in the chat so far.
Yeah.
And if people do want to join the actual Teams meeting, you should have had a link sent to you earlier by Tom through the Splunk sort of a messaging system.
The group's emails, so double check that if you've got a rule or something. But that's if you just want to join Teams. Otherwise, YouTube is perfectly fine.
Oh, we've got a comment.
So
How long?
There you go. How long did the migration take? Lax, how long did it take? Like, I guess end to end, right? Planning and implementation. How long did that all take?
You're on mute.
We've lost you, Lax, or you're on mute. I mean, I know it was weeks, but like, there you go, Lax. Yeah, I think your internet's having some issues, but okay, everyone with a different one.
Do you mind posting the Teams link in the YouTube chat?
I mean, we still admit people and stuff, and it'll be this won't be present.
Okay.
Yeah. If you want the Teams chat, let's go for it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, Michael, it took a few weeks for a few different reasons, because obviously the discovery piece and then getting access, there's all that kind of stuff that takes its time, right? And because as we've already said, the company wasn't very well resourced. It just means that things did take longer than they should have. But the actual implementation, like, of doing this wasn't too bad. It was more about, like, because obviously it was such a unique situation where the customer really couldn't let us just build a test environment, validate everything, and then flip it over. There was lots of kind of talks about risk and making them aware that there might be data loss, and obviously would minimize it, etc. So it did take a few weeks to get this over the line. But again, with the ability to use more of a testing capability, we probably could have got it done much quicker. And if the customer had the ability to, 2 seconds, sorry. If the customer had the ability to provide that, then we could have gone much quicker. Okay, I'll continue with the rest.
I'm struggling to post the link because it's too large to. I'm going to find a shortener. Just give me a second.
Yeah, so there is a link coming. Okay, so I'll just start this just for the sake of time. So thanks for the question, Michael. Hope that answered it to a degree. So what is SC4S? So is it sausages cooked for Splunkers? And yes, that's the best one I could come up with that was clean. But Splunk Connect for Syslog, or SC4S, is basically a containerized solution for syslog data. Now, obviously, we were talking syslog before for that migration. You've got other native options like rsyslog and syslog ng. But SC4S is kind of, it uses syslog ng as its kind of base, base capability, if you like. But it also uses a HTTP event collector to then forward that data on. So it was originally a community built capability, but Splunk actually kind of took over the support for it eventually, and it is now kind of the recommended application and almost the go-to for onboarding of syslog data. It is kind of one of these things where if it's a known data source, then it just works. If it's not, then there is a little bit of work you need to do, and we'll talk about that in some of the other slides. There is a GitHub page for it, so if you do kind of have any requests or issues with anything that's in the configuration, either the container or the parsers, then you can raise issues, and there are actually Splunk SC4S people who will monitor it. I forgot to put on here as well, but also in the community, in the user group Slack, there is actually a Splunk Connect for Syslog channel. And one of the original developers, if you like, Ryan Fairclough, he's in there still. So he actually really helps a lot of people with a lot more of the intricate detail, because obviously he was kind of involved originally in the build of this thing. So I'll show you the documentation in a bit, but there are two main sources of documentation for your SC4S capability, which is you've got the github.io, which is basically where all of the installation, configuration, development, troubleshooting, known sources, all this kind of stuff is on there to help you build the system, use the system, troubleshoot the system, and develop on it. And then the github.com is basically where all of the files are. So it contains all of the default parsers for known data sources and contains all of the other kind of configuration items. There you go. And all the configuration items as well are included on this GitHub page. So if you ever need to view a parser, they're not actually made available on the container to you because you can't edit them. But if you ever actually need to see it, and I'll show you it in the slides in a second as well, sorry, on the internet in a second, and you can go in and actually have a look at the parsers, see what they're doing. And you might need to sometimes because there might be a little bit of incorrect data on the actual GitHub IO page, but I'll talk about that in a second. So just a little bit about syslog. I'm sorry if you already know all this, but there is the key to making good architectural decisions when it comes to syslog collection. There is best practices that you need to follow and that have been learned over time. Now, the SC4S documentation is very kind of thorough, I would say, actually on syslog and its pros and cons. UDP is still the primary method, and to be fair, I know a lot in the olden days anyway, when we used to talk about sending syslog to a UF, it's always over TCP, but TCP can actually add a little bit of overhead and issues as well on the receiving side. So it's explained more on the SC4S documentation. I don't want to paraphrase, but they do actually recommend UDP. Syslog is a data loss protocol, as in it's expected sometimes that it's going to lose data, but UDP still makes it kind of work the best, if you like. Also, centralized collection doesn't really work. So to provide scale and resiliency, you should really try and keep your SC4S boxes as close to the source as possible. You definitely don't want it kind of going over WANs and multiple network layers because it's already a data loss protocol. By adding all these hops and all these latencies, etc., then you're probably increasing that risk exponentially the longer it has to actually travel before it's actually collected. So it is recommended, even again in the documentation, to make sure that you have your SC4S boxes kind of positioned as close to the source as possible, and then just sending over HEC. And HEC sends over, can send over 443, obviously, to Splunk Cloud, or 8080, I think is the default one for on-prem. So if you are going to the cloud, it just goes out via a normal port anyway. So you wouldn't want it kind of jumping around your network before it goes up to the cloud. But the main thing is, and again, the documentation calls it out so much, data loss is expected with syslog. So you just need to do the best you can to minimize it. So now we get into the bits of SC4S. So obviously parsers, most people understand what a parser is. They do have inbuilt parsers that are not exposed on the container. So if you're actually in the system, you can't see the default parsers. So you have to actually go to the GitHub site if you want to kind of troubleshoot them and work out what they're doing, or even copy some of the things in there, because it can, with the syslog ng kind of syntax, it's quite going to sound a bit geeky, but I think it's quite cool. Like the filters that you can do can be incredibly complex if you need them to be, to pick out only bits of data from this host and send it here. And using SC4S, then you can kind of, do all sorts of different, like index replacement, source type replacement, host replacement, all sorts of things, depending on the needs of your use case and obviously the TAs in which you actually have. Now, you can create new custom parsers. I do have a development kind of life cycle thing that I drew up about developing your own parser, because most of the stuff you need to do can be done in the configuration files, but sometimes you will need to create your own parser for specific information. Obviously, if you do create these, and if you're in a load balance scenario, now I should have said on the last slide, again, load balancing is not recommended with SC4S. I have seen it. We have customers that use it. But because it's already a data loss protocol, or at least we accept that there is, load balancing, again, can just add an additional kind of potential issue there. So again, ideally not. But if you are in a load balance scenario where maybe you have 4 or 5 boxes behind a load balancer, then of course you need to make sure that that configuration is across all of the instances. Now, you don't have like a deployment server for SC4S, but if you use something like Chef, Puppet, Ansible, that could probably fill that gap just to make sure they're all consistent. When I was doing my development on one customer, I had to use secure CRT or something, and it allowed me to have a group of servers that I could just send commands to. And so all I was doing was just like echoing all of the file contents into the files across all of the servers. And I found that worked quite well, because then I could also restart the service, etc. as well. Now, if you don't know the structure of a syslog message, most syslog messages will have what's called like the program or like, and I'll show you what that means in a second. Now, most parsers will use the program in the syslog message to then work out what to do or what it is, and then work out what to do. And you can see this in the Nix syslog default. So with SC4S, if you put something through and it doesn't match any filter, as long as it is a valid syslog message, it will end up in the Nix syslog source type, and it will break it down, and the actual source value will be the program. So if you then need to write a filter looking for a specific program, then you can do that quite easily. Sorry, I think I can hear my dog howling. Because there's also a thing where, let's say you've got a bunch of different capabilities and they're all Linux based, as in they've all got cron D, audit D, host D, all sorts of daemons on. Now, you can't have it whereby, sorry, not every parser will handle those, because technically it's a Linux thing, so they'll end up in the Nix syslog source type. However, you might actually want to log that data in VMware or FortiGate or whatever indexes. So you can do that, but you just have to be aware that if you send data through the parser and it doesn't quite know what to do with it, most of the time it's going to end up in the Nix syslog. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second. The default indexes, so the parsers do have default indexes in them, which again is, if you need to switch that, then you need to use some of these configuration files we'll talk about in a second. But these are all the default indexes that all of the parsers on the platform use. So if you have all of these indexes in your Splunk indexer layer, obviously, or in the cloud, then you will be able to basically log all of the data through the parsers that are known, right? So all of the inbuilt parsers will use all of these indexes. Obviously, if you do then update your SC4S and there's a new known source, you might need a new index, but I would say these cover pretty much most of the potential scenarios that you would need. Now, although it says it's optional, I would highly recommend creating a metrics index, not an event one, a metrics index called _metrics, and that allows basically SC4S to send its own metrics data into Splunk. And so if you want to troubleshoot EPS, if you want to see how your hosts are handling, how many filters are being like matched or not matched, because sometimes, when you're doing the implementation of this, weird things can happen. And so the analytics workspace actually allows you to see the metrics, in real time if you want, or, as the usual sort of Splunk time frame allows you to. Now, depending on the template that comes for your data that you're putting through, it will always index certain fields. It'll index some SC4S information like tags, protocol, destination, etc. And it will also index things like host and time as well. But what it might do is it might strip those values and index them, so your host value, your timestamp, etc. But it won't actually present that in the raw. It will only send the syslog message, which again, syslog messages are broken down into like specific sections, if you like, and one of those sections will be the message, but then there's always things like priority, protocol, host, timestamp, and other information as well. So there are different templates, and there are syslog ng templates. They're not kind of SC4S specific, but most of the templates that I've seen use message only. So you need to be a little bit aware that if your TA or your Splunk app or whatever is looking for over, let's say it's got a regex for the entire syslog event, and then you use SC4S and it truncates that just to the message, you might find that things don't quite match, right? Now, most apps nowadays shouldn't have whole regexes over the entire event, but it still happens. So as long as the message has all of the information in that you need, then again, everything should still be okay. But it's just something to be aware of, because SC4S will manipulate the data slightly differently than you're used to just sending a full syslog message and letting Splunk do all of the heavy lifting. So it's just something to be aware of, but you can change this, and I'll show you how to do that in a little bit too. The two main indexes, though, that you want or that you need to be monitoring, I would say, with any SC4S deployment is the last chance index. So if, for example, it tries to index something to one of the standard indexes and it doesn't, that index doesn't exist, it will put it in the last chance index. And also, if it doesn't know what to do with it a lot of the time, it will go into the last chance index. Well, as in it goes through, but it doesn't know what vendor it's related to. But the main index is basically where you'll get, it's not matched any parsers. It literally hasn't been able to work out, because it might be a different RFC type, for example. There is different RFC types of syslog, or it might not have caught any of the parsers, and it might not even look like a standard syslog message, so it didn't get the default NIC syslog source type. So it puts it into main, and main you'll see when it comes from SC4S, because it'll have the priority, like the syslog priority, and then underneath it'll have the actual message. And if you see it in main, you have to create a parser, because it means it slips through all of the parsers, even that last one that should be a catch-all syslog message one. So that's really, and I'll show you a flow chart I've built for working out when to do what. But that's the main thing to take away when you're implementing SC4S, is that if it ends up in the main index, then it means SC4S just kind of went, I have no idea what I'm doing with this. So we talked about manipulating the stream, if you like. So because you can't edit default parsers, and they do have things like default source types, default index names in, you need to be able to manipulate that to change it. Now, rather than copying the entire parser and making your changes and putting it as a custom parser, which is one way of doing it, but it's very clunky and highly unsupported, what you need to think about is start using some of these metadata files. So we've got at least kind of 4 main items. Some of them have 2 files to work. Some of them just have 1. So you've got the Splunk metadata CSV, which effectively, if it already knows what it's doing and you want to change the index, source, host, source type, or the template, which I was talking about before, then you can just use Splunk metadata CSV. And it is literally a comma separated line of, here's the parser that I want to tackle. So anything coming through this parser, I then want to change this and then to this. And I'll show you how that looks in a second. Vendor product by source is more about kind of, you can update some of the index time fields like time zone, vendor product, and other things like that as well. It's also a way of kind of, if there are filters, because sometimes obviously due to like order of operations, something might get picked up by an earlier filter, but you need it actually to go to a lower filter. And so you can use the vendor product by source to almost force things through a parser, because if you don't tell it what to go through, in the same way if you don't tell Splunk how to break an event down, it's going to go through all the parsers until it finds a match. But you can use vendor product by source to say anything from this host, this network, with this program, or whatever that it can pick out, send it through this parser by default. And there's a conf and there's a CSV. So if there's a conf and CSV pairing, the configuration file, the conf file, has the syslog ng filter. So in the squiggly brackets with this is what I'm looking for, etc. And then in the CSV file, you call that filter, tell it what to change, and then tell it the value that you want to change it to. Again, I will show you these files in a moment. Compliance method by source. So again, you can change things like index, source type, and source. But with this one, you can also add fields. So if you want to add further context, and I'll show you, I do have a demonstration of that too. If you want to add some fields to add further context or metrics or whatever it is, then you can actually use this, these conf and CSV files in order to add additional fields as well. And there'll be indexed fields as well. So if you are looking to maybe add some index time fields so you can run T-stats on this syslog data better, rather than having to maybe accelerate a data model for it, right? Then that's probably one use case I can think straight away, but it could be anything. It depends what you need to do. If you're just getting things through from IPs and their host names are only IP addresses, then you can actually use the host.csv to do a reverse DNS lookup, and it will replace the IP address with the actual host, right? Because all of these files, all these compliance files are like last ones that are ran. So once it's gone through all the default parsers, And as long as it knows, at least to a degree, what it is, then it'll run through all these compliance files. So this is your last chance saloon to fix the data up before it gets sent out over HEC to your Splunk instance. I talked about metrics briefly, but again, you can use the Splunk Analytics dashboard to check the metrics, and it's obviously, because metrics indexes are really small and full of small, tiny bits of data, that it can also be pretty quick and responsive. I'll show you this in the demo as well, but in the left-hand pane, you can select the relevant data points that you want to monitor, like destination processed or something like that. And then it'll add like a little block into your analytics workspace, and then you can change the title, and you can even set some of the settings in the right-hand pane to group by, because there's a global one, but you can also use like right-hand to specify pane-specific options so that you can really reflect the data that you're trying to monitor or look for. The drop downs will populate. So when you do like it's almost like a by clause, right? Effectively in the panel. When you click it or split by, you can do like the drop down, and it will populate all of the fields that are available. And when you select it, it'll just refresh that panel, and then you can start seeing all the information. Here's just a screenshot. So you can see we've got other stuff too, but SC4S or SC for syslog is where you want to go. And then there's lots of different drop down options and data points that you can look at and build as many of these out as you want, and then save them. You can even then save this analytics workspace into a dashboard as well. So again, you can have this as something you monitor continuously to kind of keep an eye on the health of your SC4S instance. Okay, so I think this is time for the demo. Just remember which way I'm going. Okay, so just a couple of simple ones. First of all, whenever you restart or start SC4S, then you will actually get an event in your Splunk instance, which will be this one here. I've called it Phantom SC4S, source of SC4S, and then SC4S events. And as you can see, that just goes into the main index. Now, what I have here is I have basically the ESXi host sending syslog data into SC4S. At the moment, it's going into the default index for the VMware based on the parser. And I go to the documentation to look at the parser, which is this one here. And you can see this is how it works. So it's coming through. I'll just briefly explain the parser before I go back to what we're doing. So these are all actual filters. So the filter gets a name, and then it tells you what it's looking for. Obviously, there are additional flags that you can add depending on whether it's a host, a program, or anything else. Again, all of this is available in the syslog-ng documentation. It's no secret source. It's available. If you've ever dealt with syslog-ng, this probably looks very familiar. But what I really like with this is you can then do rewrites based on the information. And then you can see here, it'll do things like it'll set the source with some variable substitution. It'll set the source type as well. And you can set some additional things. And then the template is what is probably most important here. So you can see it's quite clever that you can do like if statements as well in here. And you can even do ands and ors in the same filter in case you have something really tricky that you're trying to pick out. And then at the end here, it'll do something quite clever too, whereby what it'll say is if you match any of these filters, you don't have to write all this stuff in one little bit. You can just set individual filters and say anything that matches this filter, send it through this part or send it through this part, etc. And as you can see, it has split it up depending on what the potential ESXi or ESX data coming through is. But the most important thing, if you're trying to use these metadata files, is this bit of information here, because that's like the parser name. So when you're trying to refer to something that comes out of a parser, you generally need this. Now, the documentation is sometimes out of sync with the parsers and vice versa. So I always recommend, where's it gone? Coming into the sources of this documentation, going to known vendors. And in this case, I'm going to go to VMware, vSphere. And down here, it should give you the keys that you need to use. Now, like I say, sometimes the documentation and sometimes the parser documentation isn't quite kept up to date. So if you try one and it doesn't work, go to the other and it will work. And I had to do this today when I was just getting.
I had the same problem, Tom, because with the migration that we had VMware Horizon data, So which we were trying to parse through the key. The keys did not match with the documentation and the parsers. So one way I was troubleshooting is when the SE4S understands that, it tags something called SE4S tags and vendor.
Yeah.
So if you look at the tags fields, it tells you how it is interpreting that. So then you take that vendor and the key name from there and put them in the Splunk metadata and restart SE4S, it will work through. So that way you can avoid possibly going down the parser route if you can to mimic the behavior and get the data coming into the right index and source type.
Absolutely, yeah. So yeah, SC4S, like I say, as Lax rightly said, these are all like the index fields that it adds for every event, right? So it will tell you the tags that have been applied. You can see also where sometimes it doesn't match. It says sort of bad 5424. So like we might have used a 5424 template, which is the RFC number, by the way, and it might not match quite well enough because it does require it to be in a specific format. But you will generally see here at the bottom, the last one is usually the one that it will actually apply. So in this case, I would have to use VMware _ vSphere -PGM to actually move some of this stuff across. This is one that I've already done. So if I show you my configuration files, I'll do the metadata first. So what I've actually done, just because it is easier to see if you look for 2 seconds. So I should have set that one up. Also got my daughter building something in her room right now, which is very annoying. Oh no, I can just do index equals last chance, sorry. So when I was talking about programs, so this is one of the messages that came through, right? And even though if this was the full template, the full syslog message, you'd have a date, timestamp, a host name, and then this. But because it's broken it down by the program, then if you needed to now write a compliance filter to get this somewhere else than the last chance index or whichever index the next syslog one goes to, then you can use this value here as the program in your filter. So where you saw before, where we've got like program here, like program this, and then it's a string and it's prefix, and if you want to ignore the case, you can. That's where you would get that information, right, is from here. Or if you already understand syslog and you can see the full message via a TCP dump or something, then you can see, right, that's the program I need to hit, and then that's what I will use in my configuration files. So I've already got Nick syslog going into last chance index just because it was easier for me to show, and it's something we also had at another customer. If I look at the compliance.conf, I've actually selected just the cron-d program and given it just the single filter. Now, the name is important because it has to be a unique name, because then you want to use it in your CSV file. And what I've done is I've said, for this one, change the index to SC4S demo, which is the one that you saw it in. But I've also added a field called result and given it a value of success. So here, result, success, right? So you can now start adding additional fields into your syslog data if you need to. Again, it might be more for kind of metrics-based stuff. But if you do feel, I don't know why I did that. If you do feel like you need to add additional fields into the instance, then you can. Now, what I want to do is I want to kind of show you this, I guess, working in real time. So at the moment, right, I've got this data coming in. Well, I could use RTP proxy, or I could use the one I've already got, which I think is host D. But I want the full syslog message to come through for this particular instance, right? So what I'm going to do is if I go here, and I'm also going to reroute this as well to the SC4S index. So give me a second. Bear with me, just want to get this done. So this one. Now this may take a few minutes to do, which is why I'll probably run onto the. So after this, when I restart the server now, everything should just work, but it might take a few minutes. So what I'm also going to do is I'm going to do the next bit, which was the Splunk metadata. And I'm going to change that template. Okay, so here I know that it's actually VMware vSphere ESX for the host D. I'm changing the SC4S template to T everything. So whereas before, you can see it's got line, prox, RTHT3, or in fact, it will be host D for the one I'm actually trying to do. Now you should see timestamps and host names in the beginning. Now, to restart the SC4S box, it is just a system CTL restart. Sometimes it takes a second. Sometimes it takes 10 plus seconds. It just depends. I generally find the longer you've left the box, like without ever restarting it, the restart can take a little bit longer, but it shouldn't ever be more than about 10, 20 seconds. If it is, then there could be problems. But what you do after you've actually checked it is this. Now, when you run this command, if you run it as soon as the server has come back online, you might just get little slices of it. So you'd sometimes have to run this command a few times, because what you want to see, and in fact what you need to see on the end, is this one. If it doesn't start syslog-ng, something's fallen over. But the good news is it'll generally tell you up here if something's gone wrong, or if the message is too long, it'll tell you that you need to run this command with like an extra couple of settings, and then you'll see the more verbose message as to what went wrong. And it will usually point to where it's gone wrong. If it's a compliance file, if it's a parser file that you've created, it'll tell you where things have gone wrong. But obviously, you've got to bear in mind that if this syslog-ng doesn't start, then your box is technically dead in the water at the moment. It's not processing and sending anything, right? So when you restart the box, it is very important that you don't move on and start validating your configs or validating what you've done, excuse me, until this message appears. Okay, that is really important. It's something that tripped me up a few times. I was like, oh great, it's not reporting that it's down. Going, why isn't that working? And oh, why is all syslog data stopped? So it's very important that it actually tells you that syslog-ng has started. And I would probably say 99.9% of the times, if it's done this and it looks like this, then you're all good. Okay. The good thing as well is they do have example files. So if you need to see how some of these other things are set up, then you can look at the example files as well, and it'll give you ideas. Again, these are all just syslog-ng capabilities. You can do netmask is almost the rsyslog from IP, for example. And then the CSV will also give you some of the other things. I do wish, if I'm totally honest, that they did a little bit more than that. They give you a little bit more of the options, because again, the documentation kind of shows the options, but it doesn't really go far enough, in my opinion. So let's see if we've actually managed to do this. So we should now be able to look in this index. Let's just do 15 minutes. Okay, so there might not be any host D stuff coming through just yet, he says. These are all just cron D. Sometimes the ESX host can take a few minutes before it sends stuff through. So I'll see if there's anything else I can talk about. So yeah, this is the metrics analytics dashboard. So you just access it through analytics. And if you've got this actually set up and running, then here's all the information that you can get. So you can get resource information. You can see you've got lots of other index information as well. But SC4 syslog is where you want to go to get your information. And again, you can dig through all of these. You can see what your average batch size is, how many events per second you're processing, message size. Sometimes that's important as well if you're trying to work out if maybe your syslog is bloated. Filters. So if you're like worried that things, or if you know things aren't getting matched, for example, or even if you just want to monitor when things aren't getting matched, then you can do that here. And again, when you click on this, it puts one of these panels in to the main window. You can set the time globally. You can refresh the screen as well. It doesn't generally auto refresh, as you can see, and so you do have to refresh it if you want to update the actual time. And obviously, as you can see, this is where I restarted the box. You can do a global split by if you want to, but also if you are actually already in the pane, then you can come in here and you can do pane specific settings. So again, you can do different aggregation. You can split by, and here it'll bring up all the information, all the fields that you can split by here. If you want to do a little bit of a time shift, you can do that as well. And you can even add additional filters and reference lines if it's something that you're trying to kind of, graphically actually see work. So let's just see if I've got anything in here. So here we go. So everything now that comes through as VMware ESX log, and bear in mind it, as you saw in this parser file, it will, for any ESX stuff, bear with me, so ESX log, and then it adds the program that it finds into the source and the source type. So there's one of the changes definitely worked, right? Give me a second. Because now, if your TA or whatever it is that you're running over the top of this requires the full syslog message, generally most of these SC4S parsers will not spit out the whole message. They'll generally do message only or some specific RFC type message type, for example. So if you need the full thing to come through, don't worry, you don't have to go and edit the parser. You just literally tell it through that Splunk CSV file that use this template instead. And this is where you now get the full message. Now, let's see if we've had any host D stuff come through, because that should be the other thing. Aha, here we go. So again, not only has it converted the message now, because bear in mind before, I don't know where it is actually in the full message, but yeah, where is host D in there? Am I being blind? No. So you can see it's obviously changed this. It's also changed it to the SC4S demo, because before I only had PronD stuff coming through, but now I have this coming through. And the reason why this doesn't have the full syslog message is because it's a different source type and it's a different parser. It's coming out of the NIX parser rather than the VMware parser, because the VMware parser doesn't handle all the Linux daemons, basically. So I think that's everything I needed to show. There are obviously internal index information about SC4S as well. So there's a whole range of information available on your Splunk instance once you've got SC4S actually coming in. And hopefully that demo kind of showed you some of the capabilities and how quick it is, right? I mean, it really is a case of the filters don't have to be too painful. Put it in the CSV file to tell it what to do with that filter, restart SC4S, and you literally, because it's a container, and as long as your syslog is flowing through it quickly, you'll just see that change instantly in the data. So very quick, very cool. Right. That's just me saying cool because I'm really geeky. I learned this whole system in 3 or 4 days at a customer. I genuinely don't think it is too hard to learn it. I hadn't ever touched it before, and I had to go into a pretty complex customer. And we had an additional challenge where all of their syslog data was forked from our syslog. So I couldn't do any from host or network netmask ones because it all came from the same IP address. So I had to use these compliance files to kind of go, oh, well, and you can bear in mind in these compliance files, in the filters, sorry, you can use regexes, you can do matches. Like there's all sorts of other ways of doing it other than just if from this host or if from this IP or if this program. There is other options you can use as well. And I had to do a lot of that because, like I say, the customer was sending it directly from a single source. And there was probably about 20 different source types of syslog data coming through it. So my compliance files ended up, pretty big, but it all looked nice and clean and it all worked. And it should survive things like updating of the parsers and stuff like that, he says. So the last slide I think I'll leave you with, I believe it's my last slide, is my development decision process. Again, it's mine. This isn't anything official. This is just what I came up with based on my experience. So if you can take anything from it, then great. And if not, that's fine too. So the start off is like, where is the data landing now? So obviously we've got to preempt this with you're already firing your syslog data to SC4S. You've already configured it. It works, as in it's able to receive the data because you're getting data into Splunk of some description, even if it's the metrics. That just proves that it's connected. So where is it? Has it landed up in the last chance index or has it ended up in the main index? If it's in the last chance index, try and find the source field, right? It should, if it's come through as like the NIX syslog source type, which is the kind of the fallback source type, then you can see the program in the source value and therefore you can write your filter. Navigate to GitHub IO, and if there is an existing parser for this information, then it means it might have slipped through somehow, ended up in NIX syslog before it ended up in the proper one, even though NIX should be the default one. Then you use your vendor source type by product to basically force it through that parser, okay? If it worked, good job. Move on to the next one. Now, if it didn't work, then there might be something else that's causing that. Even though you forced it through the parser, that parser might still not be able to pick it out for some reason. So does it look correct? Yes, right, okay. Then use compliance metadata by source to manipulate and move things around, right? is there, if it doesn't look correct, then is there a metadata field that we can then use in the metadata.csv to make that data look better or go into the right place or have the right source type and all that kind of stuff? Because again, these parsers are built by Splunk, and they, for example, that source type isn't known by the VMware app, or it is by one of them, but not the other, for example. So there's sometimes you need to kind of override some of the defaults that you can't just manipulate on the platform by changing the parser. But then obviously, if all the answers to this is no, then build a custom parser. And there is documentation, like I say, those existing parsers on the GitHub instance should be enough for you to kind of understand what it's trying to do. And start off simple, just do a single program, single IP address or something like that, check that it works, and then start doing ands and ors. If you want to do an and an or in the same filter, then it's just a double bracket thing. So put all of your ors and then and yeah. I won't go too much into that one, but I did have to kind of go down a little bit of a rabbit hole with the ands and ors because of that rsyslog limitation I was talking about at the previous customer that I was on. So that's everything.
Just to only one thing, just to add to that, Tom, that is really useful flowchart, right? One of the customer that I had an issue with, with the migration, we had scenarios where two of their products were not supported by SC4S vendor. They were not there in the vendor category. That posed another challenge, because now how do you go about them when the product is not supported in the SC4S? Then I had to build an rsyslog fallback, but then SC4S provides another option called simple underscore vendor. So in it's discussed very briefly in the SC4S documentation somewhere embedded. But what you can also do is you can use your metadata file, Splunk metadata file, to use a simple underscore vendor name. It should be at only two keywords, simple underscore the vendor name. And then you can force your data to go through that using appropriate UDP port, in which case you will be able to successfully parse the data using the appropriate template without even writing a custom parser. But again, if it works, well and good, you don't need to go down the custom parser route. But if it doesn't, unfortunately, we'll have to go down to the custom parser route. But that is another challenge I had, and then we had to use the simple vendor option and then make it work. Thanks,
Tom. And thanks, Lax. Yeah, exactly. Like building your own parser, in my opinion, should be the last resort. But as I said, there is a clear reason to do it. If it just goes straight through and ends up in the main index without being touched at all by SC4S, you have to build a parser. Although what Lax said might work, but I haven't got any experience of that. But yeah, you should avoid it where possible, because generally the compliance files, you'll be able to manipulate something and then force it through something else potentially. But that's where the documentation comes really in handy, right? Because you can see what the parsers are trying to do. And then you can come onto here and see what the app is trying to do. You can also see things like what TA it's meant to be working against, etc. So I've always been a big documentation proponent. And so the SC4S documentation, even though sometimes it can be a bit out of sync, is still actually pretty good. And it goes all the way from, no SC4S to installing it with some really clever stuff. You can also fork stuff from SC4S. So in the same way you can do with like Cribble and stuff, if you needed to also fork your syslog data off to somewhere else. We had a customer that wanted it sent to Skybox, something like that. Anyway, they wanted it sent into that so it could just do some additional threat intelligence. So yeah, there's lots of stuff you can do with SC4S. Like the limits are kind of, your imagination, really, because using those compliance files, you can do some pretty cool, funky, geeky stuff with it. All right, so that's everything for my talk there. Is there any questions that anyone has? Post either in the Teams chat, which I can see now, or post in the YouTube chat, and I'll see if I can answer it before we move on to any other business. I'll give it like a minute before we move on. So I'm counting 60 seconds in my head, which I do anyway in the gym.
The stream is on a 30-second delay, so getting quick.
Yeah. Yeah, I forgot it's on a delay. As he turns around and watches himself drink a can that he only drank 30 seconds ago. Okay, I mean, if any do come through, Andrew will give me a shout anyway, and I'll happily answer them. SC4S is, I think it is a good capability. I just think some people find it quite hard to understand all the complexities that you can do, but I always try and do the KISS principle, right? I try and simplify things as much as possible. And so it is kind of it does just work, but you have to make sure you've set things up properly. And if it doesn't, then the compliance files, once you kind of understand what each one does, I'll be honest, the two main ones you want to use is the Splunk metadata.csv and the compliance file. The vendor by product, I haven't really used too much and hasn't always given me good results. Host.csv, that's obviously if you just need to use those reverse DNS lookups. Oh. Welcome. So the hosts one is basically where we like I say, if you've just got them coming through as an IP and you want a real host value, it doesn't change the host value. So if you've already got a DNS name coming through and you want to change that, you have to use the compliance files. The host CSV, I was trying it earlier and then I read the documentation and it pretty much explained that it's just a reverse DNS lookup. So if it's an IP and you want to turn that to a real host name, then you can do that using the host file. But beware, because it will obviously take up resources and will, hammer your DNS, right? Okay, any questions on SC4S before we move on to any other business? Okay, I think that's everyone from the 30-second delay stream on the team, so I should be okay to move on. So our next session, we haven't got one planned yet, but generally our cadence is every other month, so every 2 months. We generally try and hold one. Now, the only reason this one's virtual today is because the Adama office and the kitchen where we usually kind of present this from and have in-person pizza, refreshments, whatever, is getting remodeled at the moment. So this one is virtual. So keep an eye out for the next one. We do hybrid it. So we do virtual as well, obviously through the YouTube channel. But there is also the ability or the option to come into the Adama office in Edinburgh in order to actually meet Andrew and I and, like I say, catch some refreshments, etc. If there's any ideas or if there's anything you want to even present yourself, we're always looking for presenters. Me and Andrew are pretty much like the sole content for this user group, which is why I'm thankful for Lax today for jumping in as well. So if there is either an idea that you want us to put a talk together for, we're pretty clever people, we can do something like that. Or if you want to come in and actually do a talk and get some swag, like a speaker badge and, I don't know, other stuff that we've got, pens and hats and stuff, then yeah, please do try and join us. Obviously, if you speak virtually at one of these events, which is possible, then we will send you your swag, don't worry. So obviously you're here, so you probably know most of this already, but obviously this is the user group. We have a LinkedIn channel as well, where we generally try and share when things are coming up. It is a private channel. So if you're not in it already, please do ask to join and we'll happily let you. We did kind of get a bit of we got spammed by lots of kind of recruiters and Indian training courses for Splunk and stuff. So we have had to now kind of put it to where we actually have to accept people. So again, if you do get in, and if you don't hear or get in, then ping one of us and we'll let you in on the LinkedIn. But I don't check LinkedIn too much nowadays. There's also the Splunk Slack group, the user group. We do have a channel. Again, we don't really do much in there, to be fair, but it is there. But I would recommend the Slack anyway, because you've got lots of, you've got a Splunk Connect for syslog one, you've got Mission Control, Enterprise Security, SOAR. I mean, there's literally all sorts of channels in there sharing great information in the community. And then if you do want to present and share at the user group, please contact either of us at the addresses on the page here. And we will certainly get back in touch with you and try and work out the logistics of getting you presenting at one of our user group sessions. So I should say, is there any other business? Is there anything anyone wanted to discuss or ask? Otherwise, we can give you the rest of your evening back. Okay, I'll take that as a no. Okay, well, thank you everybody for attending this session. I hope to see you in future sessions. Is there anything you want to say, Andrew, before we close this down?
No, not really. I think it's like Cyber Scotland this week as well, which was, so we originally wanted to do this on Thursday on Leap Day because why not?
Yeah.
I think Yeah, I think there's a bunch of events going on, and then London's got a user group going on as well, which I'd recommend listening into, because I think they're actually based out of the Splunk office there, so it's quite.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so it's quite. I think I sat into one virtually a couple of months ago.
Yeah, no, definitely. We also got, is it York have a group as well? Who was the one we were trying to do a 3 for the comp thing?
Yeah,
is it Leeds?
Yorkshire has
Yorkshire,
one,
yeah.
but I
Awesome.
haven't seen an event from them for a little bit. I don't think.
Okay. But yeah, well, apart from that, yeah, is there anything else? Sorry, Andrew, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, just try spread the word. I'm trying to get it's when the user groups first started. It was sort of based out of Merchington campus up at the Napier campuses up there, and I'm trying my hardest to try to get some student interest into this again, because we've seemed to have dropped it off over the last 4 years or so. I think moving from campus and not offering pizza to students probably didn't help, but
yeah, they all want their pizza.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Andrew, again for putting this together with me. Thank you, Lax, for speaking today. Greatly appreciated. I'll have to grab some swag when I'm back in the Edinburgh office and send it down your way. And Joseph and Oswald, Michael, thank you very much for your time, and I hope to see you in future events. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.